Let's bring in Jennifer Griffin now. What's your reaction to what we just heard from President Biden?
Well, I'm trying to sort through my reaction, but I think what the first thing I would say is that what continues to be amazing to me is that every time the president speaks, he sets a deadline that then the military has to scramble to adjust to meet. He doesn't seem to understand what it takes to either evacuate people, the buildup, the time needed, the amount of people that he has promised that he was going to get out. He makes statements like all U.S. citizens will be evacuated from Afghanistan. Right now, the U.S. government doesn't even know how many Americans are in Afghanistan. When I hear the president talking about these so-called over-the-horizon capabilities, there are no over-the-horizon capabilities. Those are empty words. We do not have any bases in the region where you can place drones, where you have intelligence officers. We now have no partners on the ground in Afghanistan other than the Taliban. And how's that going to work in terms of over-the-horizon capabilities? The ISIS threat is real. Every day that U.S. troops are on the ground at the Kabul airport, they are a target. They are sitting ducks. They know that. It is extraordinary that they've gotten 21,000 people out in the last 24 hours, up to 70,000. But the people they haven't gotten out are the people they promised to get out. Americans, as well as those who were translators, who are cowering in their homes, who we're getting videos from of their family members being killed as the Taliban close in on them. And the callousness with which the statements from the White House, when the president reads those statements and starts with a domestic agenda and then says, oh, by the way, here's what's happening in Afghanistan today, it is so detached from reality. But the reality is the American troops who are on the ground at the airport, who are having to turn back people at the airport, who are having to lift babies and women over the walls, who are breaking rules at times to get people in who are in need because the rules being sent from Washington of who can come through the airport and the Taliban blocking. And now we have to ask Mother May I to the Taliban if we can get American citizens through their checkpoints. It's so appalling, and it didn't have to be this way. President Biden took this decision to go to zero. He announced a date, September 11th of all days, as a withdrawal date. The military pulls out. They have to go back in within 11 days. Then they're expected to move 100,000 people out of Afghanistan in a matter of a week. It's only been a week since the Taliban took over. And already, we reported earlier today, the military is having to pack up because, once again, the president has given an arbitrary deadline, August 31st. Why August 31st? And the Taliban now have when they hear the president talk about a deadline, then of course they're going to make him hold to that. It's so baffling. And the people who are suffering are the Afghans who are being left behind, the women and children who won't be able to go to school, and those poor American troops who are doing the best they can right now, being given an impossible task. I can't even imagine the trauma that they are experiencing right now and that they will be suffering from when they get home. And then there are the veterans back home who feel so awful, who are getting WhatsApp messages and emails from their translators who sacrificed their lives for more than a decade, many of whom, thousands of whom, we haven't gotten out. We did not keep our promise, and it is a national shame.
Well said, Jennifer. And we have a question from Greg Gutfeld, so please stick around.
Yeah, about all this mass weapon transfer, I'm trying to figure out if this stuff is actually accurate because it's so unbelievable. I mean, was this on purpose? Was this accidental? Was this part of a deal that we weren't aware of? That when we leave, we were going to leave all of this great equipment? Or is the equipment not workable? Has it been disabled? There's all these. I guess it's because I can't believe the story.
So, Greg, I think you have to separate it into two parts. First of all, when the U.S. military pulled out and left Bagram Air Base and left a fully armed Afghan National Army of up to 300,000 troops, they had to leave them with weapons. We had spent $85 billion over the years. There were bound to be stockpiles of weapons. You couldn't take all your weapons with you and then expect the Afghan National Army to fight the Taliban. They didn't expect the Afghan National Army to fold so quickly. My understanding is that some of the more advanced equipment, some of the helicopters and the Apaches and whatever, they pulled though that was part of the retrograde when they left Bagram. Now, that's not to say that some wasn't left behind, because, again, the expectation was that the Afghan National Army would stand and would continue to fight off the Taliban, even if it were just for a few months. So they were kind of caught between what do you do? Otherwise, if you really knew the Taliban were going to take over in 11 days, you would have blown up all the weapons depots. But the problem is they wanted to give the Afghan National Army a chance. The real problem was when President Ghani fled, that army fell apart.
All right, we have another question here from Dana.
Hey, Jen, I'm curious about what you hear internally, if you can speak to it, at the Pentagon, if there's frustration about being given a mission that they are not being given the resources in order to complete. And what also, when a president speaks, it's to all these different audiences, the American public, our allies, our adversaries, but also very specifically in a situation like this to our troops. And I just wonder what you're hearing in terms of reaction on that end.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't actually hear President Biden speaking to our troops.
Right.
There's always that catchphrase at the end, God bless our troops, but I didn't hear him addressing our troops. I didn't hear him addressing veterans. I didn't hear any sort of empathy whatsoever. The military, as you know, they salute smartly when they're given an order. They get as much done as they possibly can, as quickly as they can. I spoke to some former senior leaders here at the Pentagon who have served in Afghanistan, and I spoke to one last night who would have been in this position and would have had to oversee this withdrawal if he were still in command. And I asked, what is it? Is there anything the military is doing wrong from his point of view that he would have done differently and you can quibble about a few minor things. There's been the debate about whether you should have pulled out of Bagram first. And the way it was explained to me is we had a choice, and this goes back to the debating of the plan when the military was given the order basically to begin planning to withdraw back in April. And that was, do you stay at Bagram? You're going to need a big force protection to do that. Are you going to be able to get all those civilians and SIVs and Americans up to Bagram? There's not as much infrastructure around there. Or do you hope that the Afghan government's going to hold, and you know that within the next year or two you might have to withdraw citizens from Kabul International Airport? They opted for that. There are pros and cons to both. But I think I see they are working under a very difficult, almost impossible timeline, particularly knowing that there is an ISIS threat. Now, remember, what isn't explained all the time is that ISIS hates the Taliban as much, and the Taliban hates ISIS as much as they hate us. So ISIS would love to embarrass the Taliban right now. They would love to fire on the airport so that the Americans had to pull out under fire. There are a lot of different factors there. It is an extremely dangerous environment in which they are doing this. They knew that going into it, but the blithe manner in which the president seems to have given the orders to withdraw, it boggles the mind that this was all known, and this was all briefed to the president. I know there were heated discussions in the Situation Room about the humanitarian catastrophe that would follow going to zero and in Afghanistan. But once the president took that decision, the military had to do the best they could to ensure that there were no troop casualties, and now to get as many people out as they can. But unfortunately, time is running out.
Jen, please stay with us. I want to play some sound and then go to you, Dagan, from General Keane, who was on our air earlier. Please roll it.
The troops are there to accept risk to get American citizens and Afghan partners out. They are fully aware of that mission. I think we have leaders here who are absolutely risk averse. They fear a casualty. They feel somebody getting hurt seriously. They're wringing their hands over this. There's a lack of spine, I think, being shown here.
This is Biden's calculation as I see it. He is afraid to go past that deadline because anything goes after that point. You could have a live firefight at the airport. We have guys surrounded. Who knows what could happen? You could have massive casualties, civilian casualties. He'd have to then send in more men into the airport, and that's a total mess. He would rather leave when the Taliban tells him to on the 31st, just so he doesn't have to risk that situation happening. But by doing that, he strands thousands of our people beyond the wire.
Americans, our Afghan allies, and our friends. Jennifer, to that point, the frustration I've heard from so many veterans, special ops, talking to them, even talking to a man who flew a helicopter into the Idrang Valley, 1st Cavalry Air Mobile. They're screaming about, let us go in and do what we do. This is what we're trained for. We don't leave people behind. That's the frustration. And President Biden doesn't get that.
Well, the problem, Dagan, is after 20 years of war, there are so many people left behind. So what are you going to do? Willy-nilly send every veteran, 1.2 million or 1.6 million who've served since 9/11 back in to get their translators? You have to have some sort of organized effort. The Pentagon tried to organize that effort, but there have been various roadblocks, having to work with the State Department, having to make sure biometrics were done and that you knew who you were bringing out. There are constraints. I think back to the point that General Jack Keane made, it is clear that this president and any president before him does not want another Mogadishu. They do not want a Black Hawk Down. They do not want American troops getting surrounded by a crowd and getting dragged through the streets of Kabul. It is understandable. It is the U.S. military's goal to get out without having any U.S. casualties and to not have to leave under fire with any further embarrassment than what we've seen so far. So given those constraints, there is a reason that U.S. troops, for the most part, are staying behind the wire at the airport and heroically have gotten 70,000 people out in a matter of weeks. But that being said, the heartache being felt by the veterans and those who worked with translators who are sending them these calls for help, it's more than any of us can bear. But you can also understand when you're the president, commander-in-chief, you don't want to just send your forces out willy-nilly in the streets of Kabul with such a hostile force now in charge of the government.
Jen, to that point, it's a very good one about the veterans. And I talked to a guy, Special Forces, formerly Special Forces there. He's been working around the clock, doing the fundraising, trying to get the interpreters here. He said that the pleadings that he is getting from them, he said, it is almost breaking me. And I wanted to just play this sound and have you react. This is Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida. He was speaking earlier today at the House steps about this very issue. And I think back to what you said about the president not addressing them. And it seems very disconnected, but take a listen to what he said.
When future American soldiers have to go back in to deal with the problem and deal with the incompetence of this administration, how many are going to die now because they're going to have to fight their way through our own equipment, our own damn equipment?
So, Jen, I just want to maybe get your take on that, because there are several members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that served, and the anger is palpable. You had Jason Crow from Denver, a Democrat, saying similar things.
I mean, there is bipartisan outrage, certainly from anybody who ever served in Afghanistan. We've heard that. You heard the emotion from Congressman Waltz. This is not a partisan issue. And what is particularly egregious is that this exact same thing happened in 2011 in Iraq. Vice President Joe Biden oversaw that withdrawal, and 3 years later, the U.S. military had to go in to fight ISIS. It is very hard to imagine what's going to happen when the Taliban begin allowing bases to be set up inside Afghanistan. I mean, once again, these over-the-horizon capabilities, that requires some intelligence. That requires basing. We don't have that in that region. So that is a myth. And it's just, we haven't talked enough about Pakistan and how very dangerous nuclear Pakistan is next door. And you now have the Taliban on the doorstep and with an allied partner in nuclear Pakistan. The amount of proliferation of, and also let's talk about how terrorists around the world are watching this. And how is this different from the 1989 withdrawal of the Soviets that inspired al-Qaeda that then led to 9/11? I just don't understand why we don't understand that, of course, everybody would love to see not another American soldier be sent or Marine sent to Afghanistan. Nobody wants to stay there a minute longer. However, there was a way to keep a lid on things with a very small footprint. We should have changed the narrative long ago, and I fault the media for this. This was not a forever war. This was not America's longest war. This was an intelligence outpost, a strategic asset that we needed several thousand American troops to guard in order to safeguard our homeland.
Jennifer, thanks so much. We really appreciate all of those words, and I think the country understands exactly what you're saying.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.